Welcome. You are watching Line Screw 1. Censorship. It's something that people really don't pay attention to until it affects them. The odd thing about modern censorship is that it rarely tends to work, and more often than not, censorship results in embarrassing the people that try to hide or conceal ideas that they don't want other people to know about. And especially in the 21st century, when there are so many modern ways for information to move and ways to get around barriers of censorship, it just doesn't make sense that governments or organizations actually even do this nowadays. Of course, here in North America, we have to deal with censorship from the social media platforms, which of course, I guess, technically they're not required to abide by constitutional guarantees of free speech because they're actually businesses. But in reality, it's not like we live in medieval Europe where we can just go to the town square and cry out our ideas. Unfortunately, we are beholden to the social media platforms if we wish to actually exercise our free speech, which inevitably results in censorship depending on your political persuasion. Now, I'm of the mindset that all ideas are just ideas, even if they happen to be personally repugnant to me. For example, I like to hear ideas that I actually don't like nor appreciate to give me more perspective on whomever I'm trying to talk to about an issue. I think trying to conceal your opponent's perspective is actually counterintuitive, but that's just me. So today's video is something very different. We all know what's going on with Russia and Ukraine, and there's been many attempts by Russia to censor what's going on from their perspective, and of course, from our own perspective, the same has also happened. So without providing my own personal commentary, whether I agree, disagree, or whatever on the following broadcast I'm about to play, I'm going to share this with you in the idea that we all should be exposed to ideas that are censored, whether we like it or not. I'm about to play to you a snippet from a program from Radio Sputnik International. That is the Russian government-backed media group that does podcasts and radio. Now, since Radio International Sputnik is being banned in Europe, and even the other day I tried to pull up their site from here in Canada, but of course I use a VPN which registers me in the United States most of the time, I noticed that it was being blocked. I just checked today and I was able to get through, but something's going on there where occasionally even Radio Sputnik International is being banned, especially for US viewers. Now, a peculiar thing I have noticed about Sputnik Radio International is that some of their programs are extremely left-wing, some of them are extremely right-wing. It's very peculiar. Whereas if you listen to radio programs from, say, Radio Habana, Cuba, it's always left-wing. It's very peculiar how Russian state media really is more interested in dividing and conquering by releasing whatever kind of propaganda they want, whether it's to the left or to the right, to achieve their goals. That's a peculiar observation I have noticed, and that varies by program to program. So when you listen to Radio Sputnik International, whatever program you have will have its own personal bias. In the interest of freedom of expression and understanding, here's a program that the mainstream media won't let you hear.
Phone lines now open 202-521-1320. That's 202-521-1320. Myself and Jackie Lumon continue to be joined by Richard Becker. And we have a caller on the line here. Alex, tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, I was just wondering if, I'm sorry if you've touched on this, but if you've discussed the persistence of shelling that was going on in the Donbas region for years leading up to this. I've tried to do a little research on it, and I've only found really one paper that tried to kind of address it, and they essentially laid all the blame on Russia, and they used witness accounts from people who were shelled. So it was a little specious in my eyes, and I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are, because in my mind, if the Russian Federation was the one that's been shelling the Donbas region for the last 8 years, I feel like it would have been a bigger story. There would have been something to tell, and I feel like because that it's not being told, that it kind of suggests that it actually was the Ukrainian government, and that's what Russia's been claiming, and Ukraine says the opposite. And you've seen Boris Johnson, I think, came out and said this was an obvious false flag, even though before that he was saying, what we think is a false flag. Oh, no, I mean, it was a false flag. And I'm just kind of curious what your perspective is on that whole thing, because I think it was something like 14,000 civilians have been killed over the course of the last 8 years, and not a blip until Russia decides to step in. So I'm just kind of curious your thoughts on all that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Alex, for calling in. Hope to hear from you again soon. And it's a good question. I'm curious your thoughts on about that, Richard, because I think that Alex is right. I mean, the number that we often see is something like 14,000 people killed in the Donetsk and Lugansk republics in Ukraine. That really hasn't gotten a ton of coverage, it seems, in the mainstream media. And I'm just wondering, I mean, why do you think that is? How do you think the republics, those two breakaway republics, if you will, factor into this? And just how do you, see the Donbas as relevant to this equation?
It's a really important question, and I think it's a question that leads in the direction of understanding how the mass media in the U.S. really works in regard to world affairs. And that is that they are very much aligned. I would say, like, overwhelmingly, the top newspapers, the main TV networks, and so forth, and much of what's online and social media is really pumped out from the State Department. It's really like they're stenographers, as people have said before, like stenographers for the Pentagon or stenographers for the State Department. They tell us what the government wants us to hear. And, and this is very much the case in regard to the Donbas region, I think. And that I don't think anybody with the slightest bit of objectivity can argue that the casualties there are coming from, or that most of the casualties are coming from the Russian Federation. No, they're not. These are results of the attacks that go on, and this is very well known in the area, that, these are attacks by the Ukrainian military against what they view as breakaway regions. And as I said, were formed by people who absolutely rejected the idea of living under a neo-Nazi violently installed regime in Kiev. So what we get is really, again, and it's like along the same lines as what I was talking about Palestine, that if the struggle that's going on inside a country aligns with U.S. interests, we hear about it. If it doesn't align with U.S. interests, if it's perceived particularly as inimical to a U.S. interest, then we don't hear about it often at all until some, major thing happens. But oftentimes the major things are happening and we're not hearing about them. And I think that what's going on and the kind of reporting of the Donbas is an example of this. And we hear a lot when we hear about countries that the Pentagon and the White House and Congress are hostile to. In other words, who the ruling class of the U.S. is hostile to, and its political figures. That we hear almost nothing about either their positive achievements or the suffering that goes on as a result of U.S. policies. And that suffering is great in many parts of the world, particularly those where the U.S. is either supporting extremely repressive governments, like Saudi Arabia, which just took the opportunity to behead 81 people in one day, take advantage of the war crisis and the diversion. Either countries like that dictatorships that the U.S. supports and which provide enormous profits for U.S. corporations, or ones who are under U.S. sanctions, countries that are under U.S. sanctions. We don't get any real information about what that means in terms of people's lives, and it has the sanctions have catastrophic effects on people. So what's going on and how the Donbas has been reported or not reported, I think, fits into that picture.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true, especially when we put what happened or what has been happening in the Donbas and Crimea regions since the 2014 coup that is related to that, folder dossier on Ukraine that Biden had and what he did with it, then we understand that the civil war, if that's what we want to call it, in Ukraine was literally caused by the U.S. coup in 2014. And we talked about that quite a bit on this show. And one of the things that people ask, Richard, that they've asked me when I've explained to them is, I've heard, like what the caller said, I've heard that it was Russia who was doing the bombing and the shelling of these people. And then I explained to folks, but the people in those regions are ethnic Russians. So why would Russia bomb its own people? Especially after those people voted in a referendum that was completely ignored by the Obama administration and the U.S. Propped up government in Kiev to, as you mentioned, secede from Ukraine and rejoin the Russian Federation after they had asked for support from Russia to help them defend themselves against the Kiev army during this 8-year period where it was the Kiev army, Ukraine, that was bombing them in that region. So, I mean, when you're looking at all of this that has been going on, I think people come to a question about Russia's response. And I think it's a reasonable question. And I kind of wonder about it myself.
Can go to figure out what we've done, what we need to do. Yeah, I got you, I got you, I got you.